Welcome back. I want to talk about two things here with you guys today. And the first thing is something that's really been just thrust into the kind of the consciousness of us as a nation, and that is an object called the bump stock. Now, if you're anything like I am, it's something that, you hear about, I guess. Like, as I watched Discovery Channel and stuff like that, they would talk about new weapons technology and stuff, but I didn't really think about it. I didn't really, whatever it does, who cares? But the thing is, it's become a piece of kind of the market discourse as a result of the tragic shooting that occurred in Las Vegas just a little while ago. Because the assailant there used a bump stock, which has become like, it simulates fully automatic fire with a semi-automatic weapon. Now, I want to stay out of the weeds as much as possible, but my question for you is this: why do bump stocks exist? So some, I guess, entrepreneur, we use that word, took advantage maybe of a loophole, should we go there, or the language of the law, saying that, well, if I don't alter the firing pin, the receiver, the trigger mechanism, I could still potentially increase the rate of fire. And so that individual began to sell that object. This exposes something about our hearts as Americans. That I think really, because there's an interesting intersection or cross-section of society in which you see supposedly conservative ideals and sort of biblical theology come across. So that in some ways it's considered synonymous. The evangelicals, as they're referred to, or conservative evangelicals, tend to contend for constitutional rights, capitalist economics, and biblical morality. Like, it's just kind of, those three things are lumped together. It's a myth. Because I'd say biblical theology and this hard tack, almost hyper responsiveness regarding rights are incompatible. Romans 13, and in it, the first verse of this chapter is, let every person be subject to the governing authorities. Now let me ask you, is exploiting or searching for and then exploiting a loophole in law, is that what it means to be subject to governing authorities? Because I think it's something, it's inherently American to be rebellious, whether that's a Kentucky county clerk or whatever she was, withholding marriage license on a religious moral grounds, or if that's throwing tea into a harbor, or if, like, there's something inherently American about just this of sticking it to the man. And I'm not finding that a lot in Scripture, quite frankly. I see a lot of Jesus telling Peter, listen, so as to not offend the ruling authorities, go put a line into the water, pull out a fish, you'll have a coin there, and then use that to pay the tax for you and I. I see that a lot more. Paul as well. They tell, being told, like, slap that guy in the mouth. And Paul tells him, the Lord's going to smack you. To which the people say, how dare you say that to the high priest? And then instead of holding that line, Paul backpedals it instead. He says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize. Like, there's a lot more respect for ruling authority throughout Scripture than there is. And, honestly, far more oppressive ruling authority than we've ever experienced here in the United States of America. To which every, I guess, a pseudo-patriot out there comes back with, well, we're trying to prevent that kind of oppression here in this society. So are you really? Is that, like, are you really protecting anyone from anything? Just self-examination there. Are you really protecting anyone from anything? And then on top of that, what are you protecting people from? See, it'd be one thing if that you were contending for your Second Amendment rights so that you specifically could be out there on the street corners preaching the gospel. That'd be one thing. But the thing is, if you're now, as a Christian, if you're not out there on a regular basis preaching the truth of salvation to lost people, when it's this comfortable to do so, which, quite honestly, like, sure, it's not as warm to the idea of preaching as it has been in the past couple of decades, but my goodness, if we don't have freedom here. Like, don't deceive yourself into thinking that somehow you're being religiously persecuted. That's absurd. Like, if you're not out there doing it now, what do you think you're gonna do later? Like, why is it that you're so willing to get up in arms, literally, about bump stocks and magazine restrictions, but you don't contend with others about Christ as Lord? Something to think about. Because I see a lot more of things like in 1 Corinthians 9, where Paul literally, like, he lays down his rights. You have Paul, who's probably the greatest preacher, short of Jesus, that's ever lived, saying, you know what, I'm not going to fight for my rights on this issue, which, context is key. He's talking about the right to receive financial support from the people he was preaching to as a result of his ministry. But still, like, if he's willing to cede his right to an income, I think that that's a little bit more important of a right than the ability to launch lead projectiles at 357 feet per second, or whatever it is you're powder loading. He's willing to let go of his livelihood in order to make more room for the gospel to be preached. Are you willing to let go of a formed metal object in order for the gospel to be preached? Now, granted, I'm aware that rights are important. The reason the founding fathers created the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, was specifically and to remind us of how we've been empowered by our Creator with freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom to speak and express, and freedom of the right to bear arms. Like, I get that. And I understand how important those things are to protecting the status of society that we have. But I would ask you. Seriously contend with what is more important. Because what I've seen over and over and over again, overwhelmingly, is that Christians are freely conceding their ability to be heard by their attitude, the language that they use, and the way they label others, and their contentious kind of approach towards these conversations. They're ceding or conceding the ability to be heard on far more important issues because they're so worked up about guns or about speech or about like their rights to have these things. As a result, people that are lost are just turning them off. Point being this, you're distracted. From one Christian to another, you're distracted. You have allowed the world to dictate what you're going to talk about and what you're going to contend about, and in the process, losing those battles by allowing your flesh and not showing love, not showing grace, not showing mercy towards others, and instead, what has come through increasingly clear is that supposedly Christian people out there are more interested in having guns than having conversations. That's the attitude. That is what people believe. And that, and I mean, coming from me, like, I love to argue. I do. But the thing is, something I've learned over my past years here is that usually the worst thing you can do is argue about a thing. Because in the process of arguing, you might win the point, but in the process you're going to lose a friend. That you're supposed to be trying to mold conversations towards talking to people about the gospel at its core. And I think it's something else that's worth considering as well. If giving up bump stocks created an opening for you to talk about the gospel with someone, would you do it? Because I can already hear some people over here on this side like, no, I wouldn't give it up because it's incrementalism. It's that I give them my bump stocks today and I give them my freedom of speech tomorrow. And I'd say, are you willing to lose your rights to win someone's soul? And if the answer is no, it's because you don't have the gospel in you. Like, there's no other way around it. If it's true that you are not willing to concede a physical object in order to win someone's spiritual salvation, in order to open a door towards that, then you have an idol in your heart. And whether that idol is the right to bear arms or just the arms themselves, it doesn't matter, because there's only room on the throne of your heart for one God. And if it's not Christ, you are spiritually just as lost as the kids that are marching for disarmament. That's the truth. And you may not want to deal with that truth, but it is the truth. As a small addendum, I'm trying to keep this video short, but it's already going to be close to 20 minutes. I also want to make a mention of Colossians 2, specifically talking about restrictions on when to observe the Sabbath and what kind of foods to eat and to not eat and so forth, and circumcision and things like that. But what it pokes holes here is that for those on the opposite side, because I've been going hard against the conservatives here, let me train my barrels on the liberals for a second, of that if you think that taking someone's bump stocks or limiting the magazine capacities is going to change the hearts of anyone, if you think that that's going to insulate schools from shootings, you're wrong. Because while those things might have the appearance of wisdom, what they actually do is they just harden people's hearts. And it's the same thing as far as the arguing regarding on the other side that I was just going after, of that are all you're doing is you're hardening the heart of the person you're trying to win the argument against. So instead, in California, for instance, where they passed a law where you can't have ejectable magazines, they've made devices where you can just shove all the bullets in at once. Like it's just constantly, like, it's the same reason that bump stocks exist to begin with. That the human heart has not been changed by these legislative requirements. And the more you try to impose legislation, the more you either cause the heart to go underground and resentment to build against you, until eventually armed combat does occur. That's the same, it's just the truth of the matter. So if you think that you're going to change our nation, you're going to protect our kids by limiting access to firearms, you're stupid. You are a fool. The problem is the hearts of people. Like, there's the memes that go around. The problem is hearts without God, right? But the thing is, everything has a God. Every person has a God that they worship. And for some of them, it's the government. For some people, it's their right to bear arms. For some people, it's guns. For some people, it's whatever it is. Like, everybody has a God. But there's only one God that can save, that can change hearts, to soften the hearts of the calloused, to take from someone a heart of stone. There's only one God that can do that, and it's Jesus Christ. Any other thing is going to let you down. Whether that's legislation, or if that's holding on to a firearm until they pry it from your cold, dead hands. Because they will. I mean, you might think that it's all great and cool that you have an AR-15, because those are the buzzwords right now, and whatever. But the thing is, they're going to hit you with predator strikes, and they will pry it from your cold, dead hands. Anyways, that was kind of deep and heavy, right? Well, I don't know. If you have thoughts or comments, feel free to leave them. I don't know, I'm thinking I'm going to change up my intro. It's just kind of that stock thing that I've been using, but I think I'm going to start changing that up, see if I can experiment with that a little bit more. So maybe if you have some ideas on how I can do that, leave those down there as well. And look forward to hearing from you. See ya.